Welcome. In this video, we are going to be exploring an introduction to Montessori Inspired. Montessori Inspired is the curriculum that we use here at Mile High Early Learning. And so in this training, we're going to be talking about what it means to be Montessori Inspired, and we're going to take a closer look at our Montessori Inspired rubric. So let's go ahead and take a look at our objectives for today. Our objectives are: participants will identify elements of a Montessori-inspired classroom. We will also be taking a closer look at our own teaching practices and seeing if we can identify something within our teaching practices or our classroom that is reflective of the Montessori-inspired curriculum approach. I wanted to start off this session by talking about our vision. Our vision here at Mile High Early Learning is to joyfully welcome everyone into our learning community, prioritize equity, and find strength in diversity. I believe that this statement is reflective of Maria Montessori, who we're going to talk about and watch a video on that explores her life and the things that she has done in her life and goes a little bit deeper into her curriculum approach. So who is Maria Montessori? Maria Montessori was the founder of the Montessori approach. And when we talk about what it means to be Montessori inspired, we want to think about the Montessori approach when we're having these conversations and how the Montessori approach provides the foundation or base for what it is that we do here at Mile High Early Learning. We are going to watch a short video on Maria Montessori, and while you're watching this video, I really want you to think about our vision. And again, our vision is to joyfully welcome everyone into our learning community, prioritize equity, and find strength in diversity. And I want you to think about how Maria Montessori might have lived those principles and lived that vision in her life, especially as we watch this video.
Maria Montessori was a women's rights activist, doctor, and pioneer of education for children with mental disabilities. Although from a young age she knew she wanted to be different, she did not necessarily have a set path in life. Maria Montessori was born August 31st, 1870 in Chiara Valle, Italy. Her father was Alessandro Montessori and her mother was Rinaldi Stoppani. As a young child, her family moved to Rome, the city of great education. Young Maria liked to learn but did not like school because of the boring, repetitive way it was taught. At the age of 12, Maria decided she wanted to become an engineer. To pursue this goal, she would have to go to technical school. Because of the time period, it was unacceptable for a woman to be an engineer. Her father told her that technical school and engineering was for boys, and if she wanted to continue her education, she would go to classical school. In classical school, girls would learn Latin, Greek, and literature, as well as how to cook and sew. If a woman was to have a career rather than do housework and care for children, she would be a teacher. Young Maria did not like this idea. She enjoyed mathematics and science and wanted to study them further. Maria's mother was more open to this idea and encouraged her. Eventually, with help from her mother, Maria convinced her father to let her go to technical school in Rome. When she turned 13, in 1883, she enrolled there. At school, she was strictly separated from the boys. She graduated in 1886 with 138 out of 150 on her final examination. She continued her education in engineering at Rome's Technical Institute. During her time there, she became interested in biology and considered studying medicine. All of her friends and family except her mother disapproved of her decision to become a doctor. At first, she was told a woman would never be allowed into medical school. After support from her mother, letters, recommendations from previous teachers, and persistence, she became one of the first female medical students in the University of Rome. Maria's fellow classmates did not like the idea of a woman in medical school. They made jokes and often deliberately left no place for her to sit. She played these things off and didn't mind them as much because, unlike some of her classmates, she was determined to study and become a doctor. Through all of this, her mother supported her, but her father did not show as much interest or support. Because men and women were not allowed to see a naked body together, she took her dissection classes alone. The first day of this class, she was confronted by death for the first time and was frightened so much that she considered giving up her dream of becoming a doctor. But she did not. She persisted, overcame her fear, and later became an excellent surgeon. She won a scholarship for a large amount of money, as well as being granted the opportunity to work at a children's hospital. This sparked her interest in becoming a child specialist. She was awarded an exceptional score of 105 on her final examination, and after being awarded her diploma on July 10, 1896, she became one of the first female doctors in Italy. Maria was the assistant doctor at the university's psychiatric clinic. This provided the new doctor with an opportunity to study mentally disabled children for the first time. When Maria visited an asylum for mentally disabled children, she noticed something. She saw how the children were treated and knew that it was wrong. She also saw that there was nothing to stimulate the children, nothing for them to see, nothing for them to touch. She saw that there was no effort being put in to try and educate them, and that society had given up on them. In her mind, this wasn't right. This caused her to research what information there was on mentally disabled children. She came across the research of two French doctors, Jean-Marc Gaspard Ita and his student Edouard Seguin, who focused on educating mentally disabled children. Maria found in her research that mentally disabled children needed special education rather than medical treatment. She also came to the conclusion that mentally disabled children without special care and education became delinquents. During her lectures and speeches, she advocated for the education of mentally disabled children. Maria often referred to the work she had read and how these ideas, when applied, had worked in other countries. These speeches gained footing and became so popular that Maria eventually started traveling Europe delivering them. These lectures were popular partly because of the way that she spoke was easy to understand and interesting, but more importantly, the ideas she talked about captivated her audience. This caught the attention of Italy's Minister of Public Education. This led to a program being developed with the goal of educating mentally disabled children. She spent nearly 12 hours a day studying how these children in the program learned and taking notes on how to better educate them. Before reaching the goal of eventually helping them learn to read and write, she worked with them on basic tasks and motor skill activities. She took a more hands-on approach. She worked with each child on what they needed help with rather than putting them all together and just lecturing to them. She noticed that her methods were working. After helping the children for only 2 years, they were able to read and write proficiently enough to pass tests taken by children in traditional schools. Some even scored higher than normal. After conducting her research, she was later hired at an apartment in Italy to care for poor children while their parents were working or trying to find a job. The apartment kept all the children in one place so that they would cause less damage to the building. She was one of their caretakers. She observed the children and what they did. She watched how they performed and completed tasks. She applied some of the other methods she had used with the mentally disabled children to help teach the children she was taking care of. Maria found that when these methods she had used with the other children were applied, it had a different effect. The child, when performing a task, would devote their entire focus on it. They would not stop until they had completed the task. She also found that after the child performed the mental exercise, they were happier and seemed healthier. These observations helped her revise and improve her method for normal children. Maria saw potential. The method she had developed was based around independence and the child wanting to learn. She developed physical objects called materials that the child would touch and work with, which would help them learn. The teachers acted as guides and would help the child understand the concept and keep order in the classroom. But they did not necessarily tell the child what to do, when to do it, or exactly how they were supposed to do it. Because what she was doing was not intended to be a normal school, it was not set up like a normal school. This allowed her to find the cause of what was going on in the child. What she had created, she would later name La Casa dei Bambini, or Children's House. Initially, when Mussolini rose to power, he liked Montessori's way of teaching. He mandated that all schools be taught using her method because the children would score higher on the tests. They would work together, but when Maria refused to teach fascism rather than encourage independence, the relationship quickly fell apart. The Montessori schools across Italy were closed, and Maria Montessori left Italy. When Hitler rose to power in Germany, all the Montessori schools were closed for the same reason, but they went to a further extreme. The books of her teachings and materials were burned. After she left Italy, she went and lived in India, where she would live for the rest of the war. While she was there, she helped rebuild the education system in India. During World War II, she saw a need for peace, which drove her even more to include it in her teaching philosophy. The news of the success of her ideas was spread and were applied in many places around the world. She would continue to give lectures and establish schools and using her method. As this happened, she, with the help of her son Mario, would record and further solidify the method, materials, and curriculum used. She would continue this until her death on May 6, 1952. Teaching a child about peace is achieved by creating a peaceful environment which allows the child the freedom of thought. But there's more to it than just that. Maria Montessori believed that in order to achieve peace, we must do more than just talk about it. The child must learn an environment which promotes peace within themselves. This starts at the young age with the concept of grace and courtesy being taught to them, as well as how to express themselves. As the child gets older, they are taught conflict resolution and how to peacefully solve both personal and interpersonal problems. They are also taught a sense of a global community rather than an us versus them world. Maria truly believed that children are the future. She believed that in order to make peace, we must educate children, not just in an academic sense, but in the education of the whole child. In her words, establishing lasting peace is the work of education. All politicians could do is keep us out of war. The fundamental idea of her philosophy is based on the growth of the child's mind and nurturing of the child's need for learning. After becoming one of the first female doctors in a time when women were limited in what choice they had, Maria Montessori took a stand by believing that the way children with mental disabilities were treated was unethical, so she did something about it. She eventually extended this way of thinking to all children. Maria thought that a child could be taught a better way rather than the traditional way of memorizing and repeating information. She knew that the child's love and want to learn was important and was something that should not be ignored. She stood up by creating a method of learning that allowed the child to be independent and think for themselves, in turn creating that love of learning. She also created a way of teaching that better allowed children to understand what they were learning, using physical objects to help them be prepared for concepts and skills that would be taught to them later, as well as be prepared for the real world.
So Maria Montessori was a pretty unique lady, but I really think that when I think about all that she did in her life and her method and approach to teaching young children, that she really embodied what it means to provide equitable learning experiences to all children, because she was very focused on helping children, all children. It didn't matter what socioeconomic status, race, developmental disability, she was there to support. And then additionally, she really focused on teaching young children independence and really wanting to support them with nurturing a love of learning, which I think really embodies our vision of what it is that we're working towards when we say that we're trying to provide equitable learning experiences for all children. So I do just want you to take a few moments to just reflect upon the video that we just watched in Maria Montessori's life and how you think that the Montessori approach fits with our vision of providing equitable learning experiences for all children. So now we're going to dig just a little bit deeper into what a Montessori classroom looks like. And again, I think it's important that we have this foundation of what Montessori is, including the approach and the materials, because it is the foundation for what makes us Montessori inspired. And when I think about what Montessori Inspired is, I'm thinking about that we have taken things from the Montessori approach, and especially the things that we deem important and useful and valuable to providing learning experiences for young children, and we're blending them with other things in the field of early childhood education that we also know to be true. But I wanted to talk first about and provide a little bit of foundation about what a typical and traditional Montessori classroom looks like. So we're going to watch another short video, and in this video, I want you to really notice and think about two things. The first being the approach that the teachers are using, or even the approach of how the children are engaging with materials, and then also the materials and how the children are using the materials, and again, even how the teachers are facilitating the use of those materials. So again, we're going to watch another video, and I just want you to pay attention to the approach and the materials in a traditional Montessori classroom.
I know that I always had fun with the things that I was doing. We were doing things that had academic aspects to them, but I never felt like I was just doing work. Because all the activities were so hands-on, and you were building things and playing with things and manipulating materials. So I knew that I was learning, but I was having a good time doing it.
It's easier to do things with things that you could feel and you could see than having to do everything in your head.
As a preschooler, it's definitely choice-oriented. It was fun to be able to go and choose works off the shelf, you know, whether it's something to do with geometry. They had rectangular prisms to work with, or fine motor skills with the art shelf, or everyday living where you could practice pouring, and you don't know necessarily that you're learning things. There were just lots of very engaging activities to take part in, and it's fun.
I think it just comes from the Montessori teaching of follow the child and the whole community aspect, as like we all obtain success together.
My mom and dad are always saying how they wish they had learned like I did. They really like the part where you could progress at your own pace, the hands-on learning, because they said what they got a chalkboard and a piece of chalk.
It doesn't take long to realize a Montessori classroom is different from most other classrooms. The children are actively engaged, working independently. A closer look reveals each child is involved in working with hands-on materials that stimulate all of his or her senses. Materials that communicate complex concepts in a concrete way. Montessori materials are carefully sequenced so that each activity has an orderly and logical process to follow. This allows children to organize their thinking and problem-solving skills in a clear way, and to absorb this knowledge through their senses. All the materials in a Montessori classroom are organized into one of 5 curriculum areas: practical life, sensorial, language, math, and cultural.
I'd have a little rug on the floor and I'd go get my math assignment and bring it to the rug, and when I was done I'd clean it up and put it back. Or if I wanted to go eat snack, I'd go to the sink and wash my hands and get my snack and then brush my teeth. And it wasn't just sitting in a class learning, it was functioning and learning how to function as a grown-up person, not just a 3-year-old.
Small children have many life skills that they need to learn to achieve independence. Respecting a child's desire to be independent is a cornerstone of Montessori philosophy. Children develop a sense of pride when they're able to do things for themselves. Part of becoming independent learners is taking responsibility for themselves and the classroom environment. Each child learns to take responsibility for their own belongings and to master the skills of taking care of him or herself. Children also feel secure in the knowledge that they can find the materials they wish to work with neatly stored in a particular spot in the classroom. They are, in turn, responsible to put the materials back where they found them and to clean up after themselves. If another child is using the materials a child is interested in, he or she learns to wait patiently, respecting the rights of others.
In Montessori, they have works like that tested senses. Like there was this one that it had a little dropper, and one liquid was like sour, one was sweet, one was bitter. I loved it.
Maria Montessori was one of the first educators to recognize that children learn best when they are engaged in hands-on activities. She believed that children need to move freely in their environment and to investigate whatever interests them. For these reasons, Montessori insisted that the classroom be beautiful. Through this freedom, the child becomes more comfortable, taking the time to contemplate all aspects of an activity: the feel, the visual appearance, the sound of the materials, even the smell. This curiosity to explore the sensual world around them is part of what makes learning fun. The children enjoy the process over the product. Children often take advantage of their freedom to self-correct by experimenting with all the different ways to do a single activity, satisfying their curiosity about what works and doesn't work and why.
I remember learning the noun is the big black triangle, a noun is a person, place, or thing. The verb, which is the big red ball, you go out and play with a big red ball, so you know a verb is an action word. Obviously now when I'm saying like, oh, that's a verb or that's a noun, I don't need to think that's a big red ball. But having those associations when I was younger helped me to be able to distinguish different parts of speech as I grew up and now being able to write, fluidly.
Young children have a natural ability to learn language skills that diminishes as they grow older.
Is a big kid.
Emphasis is placed on learning the sounds each letter makes rather than the alphabet. Throughout the curriculum, children are developing the small motor skills they will need to be a successful writer and the auditory and visual tracking skills necessary for learning to read. Objects and images are used to begin the association between beginning sounds and names. The child learns that snake begins with a S sound, that bird begins with a P sound, or that girl begins with a K sound, and so on. Children develop a readiness to grasp abstract concepts at different ages. Montessori teachers follow the child's own sense of what they are ready to learn. In their primary role as observers of the child's progress, they present materials when the child is ready to take on new work.
I think it helped me understand what a number means. We always knew each bead equals one number. So the beads of 10 would consist of 10 beads, and they would be a very specific color. And those kind of helped you commit them to memory.
Most adults who were taught in traditional educational settings are fascinated by the power of the Montessori math curriculum. As the child becomes more comfortable with each material, the concept of numbers becomes more and more abstract. Like the language curriculum, when the abstract symbol.
So I know that video cuts off there, but I hope it gave you some sort of idea around what it looks like in a traditional Montessori classroom, including the role of the teacher, but then also how the materials are used. And so some things that I just want to point out is that in traditional Montessori classrooms, the curriculum is very hands-on. Children are encouraged to explore materials using their senses. They do food work, which you saw in there. They also do a lot of sensory work around listening and looking and touch. That's all extremely important in a Montessori classroom. And then additionally, Montessori classrooms really try to nurture a love of learning through teaching independence. And so some things that you might have noticed or picked up in there is that children are responsible for deciding what type of work they're going to work on and taking care of that work, working with that work, and then putting that work back where it belongs in a classroom. So these two videos were meant to give you a little bit more information about who Maria Montessori was and her life and her approach, and then additionally to take a closer look at what it looks like in a traditional Montessori classroom, including the materials that are in a Montessori classroom. All that to being said, that we here at Mile High Early Learning, our approach to curriculum is actually Montessori inspired. So when I think about what it means to be Montessori inspired, I think about taking elements of the Montessori approach and, like I said, blending it with what we know to be true and best practice in the field of early childhood education. So an example of this is the class tool. So the class tool is something that obviously came much later than Maria Montessori's approach to curriculum, but the class tool is something that we have blended into our curriculum because we know that there are things on the class tool that are best practice, that are research-based, that we want teachers to be doing in the classroom. Another example of this is in a traditional Montessori classroom, they do not have dramatic play areas or centers in their classroom because a traditional Montessorian would believe that young children need to have a firm grounding in reality before they explore fantasy. However, we know that socio-dramatic play is actually one of the more important types of play for young children to engage in. So at Mile High Early Learning, we have dramatic play centers in our classrooms. So again, when we think about what it means to be Montessori inspired, we are thinking of the elements from the Montessori approach that we know that we want to see in our classrooms, such as fostering a sense of independence. Montessori materials could also be included in that, nurturing a love of learning, really respecting the child as a self-directed, capable learner. But we're also blending it with other things in the field of early childhood education that we know to be best practice. So I always want to come back to this graphic. I really think that this graphic should center us and should drive us and motivate us in terms of the work that we do in terms of what it means to be Montessori inspired. This graphic also is reflective of the coaching rubric, which we're now going to take a closer look at in a deeper dive. And so when I really think about this graphic, I think about the fact that the child is at the center of everything that we do. But the child also exists within the context of other things, such as the family, teachers and leaders, the physical environment and materials, daily experience, and the community. And all of these things have the ability to impact the development of the child. But again, really, the child is at the center of all that we do here. Again, this is also reflective of the coaching rubric. So the coaching rubric has different items and domains, I guess, if you want to say. It starts with the family, and then it goes into teachers, and then it talks about the physical environment and materials, and the daily experience. And the coaching rubric here at Mile High is something that I do want to talk a little bit more about. If you're not familiar with the coaching rubric, you're going to get some information today, but it's also really important that you understand where to locate a copy of the Montessori Inspired rubric in your classroom, and or if you don't have one, please reach out to me and I'll give it to you. But why is this important? So this is important because oftentimes I think that people think that the coaching rubric is the work of the coaches. However, the coaching rubric is actually a tool for teachers. And what this does is this shows the expectations of what we would want to see in a Montessori inspired classroom. And it is modeled after the Montessori inspired graphic that we just talked about, but it really embodies what it is that we do here as an organization in terms of our curriculum. So we want teachers to be familiar with the Montessori inspired rubric. We want them to be using it as a way to reflect upon their practice and to grow in their practice as well. And it's why the coaches use it in their work, because they're using it as a framework to support you in your teaching practices and in your classroom. So we are going to take a deeper dive of what it means to be Montessori inspired, and we're going to talk a little bit more about some indicators and items that are on the Montessori inspired rubric. So first, what does it mean to be Montessori inspired? We believe that education should be child-directed, that there should be some freedom within limits, and that we should be encouraging a sense of independence. So what does it mean to be child-directed? It means when we're doing things in the classroom, we are giving the children choice. We are following the ideas and interests of the children in our classroom, and we are also supporting children with this idea of freedom within limits. So freedom within limits means that children do have choice and that things are child-directed, however, that there are boundaries. So an example of this is maybe you have work cycle time where children are able to choose the materials that they want to work on. But a limit with that would be that we have to keep the materials safe because, right, we have to keep ourselves safe, we have to keep our friends safe, and we have to keep our classroom things safe. So that would be an example of a limit, but there would be freedom to do what you would like to do with those materials as long as you're keeping yourself safe and others safe. We also want to encourage a sense of independence in our classrooms, and we do that through things like letting toddlers dress themselves or preschoolers dress themselves, or again, going back to the child-directed, that children have choice and they can go to a shelf, take what it is that they want from a shelf, use that material and then put it back. But they are taught how to get those materials, use those materials and put them back so you can encourage a sense of independence as a teacher. We also really want to be nurturing a love of learning. We want children to want to come to school. We want them to have positive experiences with school in hopes that this will continue throughout their life. And so we do that by being child-directed and by encouraging a sense of independence in our classroom. We also really want to make sure that the teacher is serving as a guide and a connection to the classroom environment. So I want to be clear in a Montessori-inspired classroom that the classroom really belongs to the children. That's what it means to be child-directed. So this space is for the children, and you are there as an adult to serve as a guide and connect them to the classroom environment by providing learning experiences that are hands-on and that meet the needs of the individuals individual children in your classroom. Additionally, in a Montessori-inspired classroom, we really believe in hands-on learning. So one thing we do not want to see in a Montessori-inspired classroom is the use of worksheets. So we know that worksheets are not developmentally appropriate, obviously, for infants and toddlers, but they are also not developmentally appropriate for preschool children. Young children learn through exploring via their senses, so they learn from their hand to their head, and they need the opportunity to actually manipulate physical objects to solidify learning. And unfortunately, when we provide children with worksheets, it's not doing anything to help solidify learning because it's not a hands-on experience. So if you are somebody who is currently using worksheets in your curriculum, I'm going to ask that you please stop, and additionally reach out for further support about other things that you could do in terms of replacing those worksheets. Because almost any worksheet that you are using in a classroom, I guarantee you that there's something that can be done that is hands-on that would teach the exact same skill. So we want to make sure that we're providing hands-on experiences where young children can actually manipulate materials as part of our curriculum and learning. So let's take a closer look at the physical environment in a Montessori-inspired classroom. So the first thing is we really want teachers to be working towards a prepared environment. So what does this mean? For me, this means a couple things. First, it means that the teacher has given thought and intentionality to the where things are placed in the classroom, including the materials that go on the shelf. But there's also a piece of this in that you are preparing for the day ahead of you. So it means that you have a lesson plan, you know what it is that you're going to be implementing on that lesson plan for the day, and you have the materials that you need to do that lesson plan successfully in the classroom. So it means at the beginning of the day, the beginning of the week, you're giving thought to what's in your classroom, including the materials and the activities that you're going to do. And so this is really, really key and important. And this is actually something from the class tool as well, is that you have a plan, you have everything that you need to execute that plan, and you're ready to go for the day. Additionally, that there is a piece of this that talks about the materials that you're putting out and why you're putting them out. So you should understand that I'm putting this material on the shelf because it meets this XYZ skill that a child needs to learn. Or additionally, maybe you have a child in your classroom who needs to work on more fine motor skills and fine motor development. So what you put out on the shelf is reflective of the fact that you have a child who is working on fine motor skills in your classroom. So all of that just means that you're putting thought and intention into the environment and materials in the environment. Additionally, we really want beautiful classrooms where there are thoughtful displays with no visual noise. So when I think about this, I think about making sure that anything that we're putting up in the wall in the classroom has meaning and meaning to children. And if it is for children, that it's at a children's eye level. So some examples of things that we would want to see in classrooms are things like visual schedules, children's artwork displayed, family trees, pictures of children participating in activities. So that's documentation. All of that would be okay things to put up in a classroom. We really want to discourage teachers, and this is actually an sub-item on the rubric, to be going and purchasing a bunch of commercially made products, like something that you'd find from the dollar store, and putting it up in our classrooms. That just tends to add up to visual noise in the classroom. So make sure anything that you're putting up has intention and meaning behind it, and especially in terms of it has meaning and intention for the children in your classroom. Obviously, we want our classrooms to be organized and free of clutter, and making sure that materials have a space in place, and making sure that materials that are alike are near each other. We also want clearly defined areas, which kind of bleeds into this organized and free of clutter idea. And so I do want to talk about the clearly defined areas that we would expect to see in a preschool classroom, a toddler classroom, and an infant classroom. So in a preschool classroom, we would expect to see a practical life area, a dramatic play area, an art area, a STEM area, which would include science, blocks, and math, a sensorial area, a language area, and a cultural studies area. And we would expect this to be clearly defined. On the rubric, we talk about a classroom map, and that's what this means. This map is for adults that can walk into your classroom and say, okay, there's your practical life area. And in practical life, young children learn this. Oh, there is your dramatic play area. And in dramatic play, children learn this. So we would want that classroom map to kind of show the environment and clearly outline the environment and where things are. Additionally, we would want like things near each other, and we have a separate map for preschool classrooms that I would gladly share with you to kind of show you what it is we're talking about when we're saying that like centers should be near like centers. Additionally, in a toddler classroom, we would expect to see these same areas, maybe not as clearly defined. We're not expecting that you put up a classroom map in your toddler classroom, but we would expect to see a practical life area, dramatic play area, an art area, a STEM area, sensorial language, and cultural studies. In an infant classroom, it's going to be a little bit more open-ended. So even though we would want to see materials from all of these different areas in your classroom, I don't think we're expecting you to have such clearly marked and defined areas. We want it to be open, and we want young children to be able to freely explore the environment around them. But we would expect that like materials are near like materials. We also want to see natural elements in our classroom. So this can look like plants, this can look like pets, this can look like you're bringing in sticks and rocks for children to manipulate and explore in your classroom, but we would want to see some sort of natural element in your classroom. Additionally, we would like to incorporate the outside environment as the outdoor classroom, is what I like to call it, meaning that you are extending curriculum to the outside. I see this done in a variety of ways, but our gardens that are at our centers is a great way to do this, so that you're still talking about curriculum and you're still talking about and promoting learning while outside. I think that this also can look like a mixture of structured and unstructured activities. So maybe you're bringing out a bucket of water and some paintbrushes, and you're allowing children to paint with water on the sidewalk, and that's a little bit more of a structured activity, and you're inviting children to participate in this outside. While on the flip side, you may also just be outside and letting children ride bikes, go down the slide, run around and play, and that's definitely unstructured, and that's okay too, because I think children need a balance of both. But either way, we would like you to consider the outside as the outdoor classroom, and that you are extending the curriculum that you're working on inside the classroom into the outdoor classroom as well. Another section of the rubric is the daily experience. So we're just going to talk a little bit about what a daily experience looks like in a Montessori inspired classroom. So first, we have blocks of uninterrupted work cycle time. So this means that children, and it goes back to that child-directed, children are giving a block of time where there is choice. So choice to work on the things that they want, and a mixture of large and small group opportunities, which we're going to talk about here in a second. In a Montessori-inspired classroom, we would want you to get up to an hour, anywhere between an hour and 2 hours of uninterrupted work time. So this means there are no transitions going on during that time, no transition to outside, no transition to lunch, nothing like that. It's just a block of uninterrupted work time where children have choice to choose the things that they want to work on, while you're also, as a teacher, facilitating some large and small group opportunities. So large group here at Mile High Early Learning looks like circle time. I want to be clear that we have no set standard for what circle time should look like, as long as it's developmentally appropriate and meeting the needs of the children in your classroom. I do just want to briefly discuss what is an appropriate time to be spent in circle time. So for preschoolers, that's anywhere between 10 and 15 minutes. For toddlers, anywhere between 5 and 10 minutes, and for infants, around 5 minutes. And really what you do during this time, like I said, is your choice, as long as it's developmentally appropriate and meets the needs of the children in your care. Additionally, we want to be very careful about this notion that all children must participate in circle time. I have an example of a teacher who had a child who, during circle time in a preschool classroom, he would go stand near the window every day. The teacher would then go after circle time and approach the child and talk to him about the things that they talked about at circle time, and the child was able to articulate what was going on. They would have good conversation. He was listening. He just couldn't sit on the carpet and attune, and that's okay. The window was what helped regulate him, and that worked. So I just want to be clear that although we have no set standards around what goes on during your circle time, one thing that we do not want to see is that children are being forced to participate in circle time. Additionally, during those blocks of interrupted work time, we would want to see the opportunity for small group. And small group is something that the teacher would actively facilitate. So it's something that you would plan to be doing during that uninterrupted work time. And so this is something that is reflective of your lesson plan. You would be listing out small group opportunities on your lesson plan. And you also probably would be talking about what it is that you're going to do during your large group when you're filling out the portion on morning gathering and afternoon gathering. Another thing that we'd want to see in a Montessori-inspired classroom are familiar routines, reminders, and visual aids. So everybody in here should have a visual schedule that should help you with setting up a familiar routine, and the visual schedule also serves as a visual aid in your classroom. We'd want to make sure that we're referring to those things and that we're using them. Another example of visual aids would be like a first then board or a choice board, or even here a picture of the steps of how to wash your hands. So all of this is important in creating consistency for young children, which we know that they need in a classroom. And so familiar routines, reminders, and visual aids is something that we would want to see. We would want to know that children know what to expect and what's going to happen next. And that's actually something that is also on the class tool as well. We would also want to see organized and efficient transitions, which I think is one of the hardest things in an early childhood classroom. We know that transitions tend to be when things can tailspin in a classroom, but it almost goes back to this notion of a familiar routine. So in an organized and efficient transition, we call that a routine within a routine. So it means that a transition is just part of your routine, but there is a routine within that transition. So another way that you can make transitions organized and efficient is by making sure that there is a familiar routine for that transition. So maybe it's the same song you sing every day, or the fact that children just know that you're going to sing a song. Maybe it is you're using circle time as a transition to outside, so children know they have to answer the question of the day before they go line up on their spot to go outside. Whatever it is that works for you and the children in your classroom, we want to make sure that transitions are organized and efficient. I just briefly want to talk about the teacher portion of the rubric. The teacher portion of the rubric, there's a lot of depth to it. There's a lot that goes on there. And this really talks about how you are serving as a facilitator, a communicator, and an observer in your classroom. And so I do want to go over some broad expectations. We would expect that you are respecting the child as a self-directed, capable learner. We've talked a whole lot about what it means to be child-directed, which is very similar to self-directed, and this idea that children are capable of learning if just given the right opportunities and experiences. And it's kind of your job when we talk about serving as an observer, a planner, a facilitator, and a communicator to make sure that you're providing those right types of experiences so that children can be a self-directed, capable learner. We would also expect that you know the children in your care and that you are able to modify support for the children as needed, depending on what it is that they do need. And so I think we do this through lots of different modes, but one way would be attending collaboration meetings, making sure you're talking about the needs of the children in your care, getting the resources and support you need, and then taking those things back into the classroom to support the children in your care. We've already talked about this serving as an observer, a planner, facilitator, and a communicator, but this is your job role as a teacher. It's your job to observe the children in your care, know who they are, plan activities based on your observation, facilitate those activities based on what you observed and planned, and then communicate out the results to that through things like TSG, parent-teacher conferences, and all that great grand stuff. And lastly, we're really looking at Montessori-inspired educators as somebody who is professional. And I think a piece of this is participating in professional development experiences like this and continuously learning to better improve who you are as a Montessori-inspired educator. So there was some homework for people who participated in this training when it was hosted live and virtual, and I will share this out to you, but we have been working on a Montessori-inspired slideshow. So I've asked teachers to take a look at the curriculum rubric, find a sub-item or an indicator from there, find a picture that matches that sub-item or indicator, and talk a little bit about how those two things align. So we are working on that as an organization, and we'll have that to be able to share out so that we have a whole picture of what it means to be Montessori inspired and what's going in our classrooms. I hope you enjoyed this video today, and as always, please reach out with any questions that you have and or if you need a copy of the coaching rubric. I would also like to state that our next trainings are going to be on our scope and sequence, so we are going to take a deeper look at some Montessori materials and how to use them in the classroom. But either way, I hope everybody learns something new and has a better understanding of what it means to be Montessori inspired. Thanks.